John Elway and Sam Zell, two people I'm fans of, and we're going to talk about how those two tie together today with our special guest. Welcome to the Commercial Real Estate Report. We're empowering you to build generational wealth with real estate. I'm your host, Chris Berg, head of business development for Abernathy Holdings, where we build Class A self-storage in California and Arizona. I'm a special guest today, Matt Moran. He played football on the farm up in Stanford back in 1998. He was part of a big $1.2 billion merger with Cornerstone Properties. And then just a couple years later, as the chief investment officer, he had a sale of Cornerstone Properties into Sam Zell's company for $6 billion. And then in 2002, he started and founded FJM Investment. So, Matt, great story. And thank you for doing the show with us. We really appreciate it.
Happy to be here, Chris.
Obviously, I can't wait to hear stories about Elway and Sam Zell, but let's start with your story. And how do you end up going from, the Stanford gridiron to commercial real estate?
Well, playing football at Stanford, a lot of the guys that I played with and who graduated, moved on, offensive linemen like me, were going into the real estate brokerage business, the real estate development business in Silicon Valley. I was using a pretty good time in the early 80s. And, I always thought I wanted to be a doctor and then an architect. And then these guys were coming back driving really nice cars. And I go, wait, that guy, I know he's not as smart as I am, or I'm at least as smart as he is. Maybe I can do this. And I just started looking into it. And I started in real estate lending. Someone said to me, hey, get behind the money, know how the money works. And so I did that. I took that route into commercial real estate. And my first job was with the Travelers Real Estate Investment Company, the life insurance arm, the real estate arm of Travelers Insurance, and as an analyst, and saw probably 70 or 80 deals a year that would come through the office, and I'd have to get the packages ready. And so I saw how deals are put together and how developers would, they would finance things and build the capital stack. And it was a great experience for me. And a year later, I went into work for Wells Fargo Realty Finance. So I was a broker of loans, and again, saw a lot of different ways how deals are put together. And that's where I met my business partner, Bill Wilson. I ended up doing a couple of loans for him. And then I moved on to Manufacturers Hanover and was banking. We were still real estate investment bankers. And I was using the balance sheet to try to get fee business for Manufacturers Hanover. And I was banking Kearney Street Capital and Colony Capital and, banking guys like Sam Zell's funds. And so that's how I first got into saying, hey, there's an opportunity here to buy distressed assets cheaply. And so that's how I hooked up with Bill Wilson. We put together a business plan and went out and raised 4 what we called office opportunity funds. We invested in office buildings, and then we built that business up and sold it to Cornerstone, became officers of the company. Bill Wilson became CEO. John Moody was the president. I was the chief investment officer. And that went on for a couple of years. And then Bill kind of brokered the deal with Sam Zell. And, obviously Sam was a great buyer. You're kind of going, who sells to him, right? The grave dancer. But he was building up his equity office platform, and we were lucky enough to be able to sell into it.
I cannot wait to hear some stories about being in the room with Sam. But is Bill Wilson, so is that the same Bill Wilson? I think I'm getting the name right. Wasn't he the running back coach or a coach at Stanford for a little while under Bill Walsh's tenure?
No, it wasn't. But Bill did go to Stanford, and that was probably one of the reasons I got the job. He was a freshman football player, undersized guy from Pasadena, and that's as far as his football went. But a big Stanford alumni, and he had a development company, so he was a office building developer. And in the early 90s, after the savings and loan crisis, you could buy office buildings, for 50 cents on the dollar. So he had this incredible infrastructure in place. And I went to him and said, hey, you can't build anything that makes any sense. Let's go buy things and fix them up with your infrastructure, your construction, management, leasing, departments and skills you have within your company. And that's kind of what we did. So it worked out great. We still did some development. We bought some properties that had excess land, and my partner, John Hamilton, would go and build great buildings on those. But Bill was known he built the Oracle headquarters, was probably his biggest development deal. So that was, and he built 10 on Ladin in downtown San Jose. Those were probably his 2 biggest office developments, but obviously he did really well. We did really well together when we went out and bought existing stuff.
So I didn't realize, I knew a little bit about your office background, but I didn't realize it was so extensive. So I'd love to get your thoughts on what do you see for office today and where do you extrapolate it out into the future?
Wow, I was on the board of Hudson Pacific Properties for 10 years, and watched Victor Coleman grow that company from 400 million in assets to at 1.4 billion. And I think now it's down to 700, 800 million. I don't know exactly. It's been a real turnaround, and I still think there's a place for office, for nice office space. I don't think people really are going to want to work from home. I don't think it's a good way to build a culture, a good way to build your employee base. I just don't. I don't agree with all this working from home stuff. But there's a place for it. I think there's the pendulum always swings too hard one way or another, and I think right now it's swung way too hard against office. But I think maybe the days of $1,500 a square foot office prices are over. And I think, replacement cost is going to come down as demand comes down, but I think it's overblown, but I don't see it ever coming back to where it was. I mean, Cornerstone or Hudson Properties was a $40 stock, and now it's like an $8 or $9 stock. And then, maybe it gets back to, $12 or $15, but it never gets back to 40. And I think you can say that for all the other big ones, Vornado and all the other big office REITs. And I just think, again, there's a space for it, but it's not ever going to be the same. My partners and I moved away from office when we started our partnership.
Yeah, we'll get into your asset class in a minute, but I appreciate what you said, because Sam Zell, speaking of Sam here, he said the same thing. He goes, look, I don't like this work from home stuff. I want my people in office, building the culture. So with that being said, knowing what you know about the space, I'm curious if you would be buying in San Francisco right now, because you see some of the depressed assets there, and then the jump on top of that. I don't know if you saw, but the Aon building recently sold for $145 million in downtown LA, which was a 45% discount, and they bought it because they're long LA because of the 28 Olympics. So, just what's your analysis there?
Yeah, I always said if I was 25 years old again and could get behind some money, I'd probably be in that asset class.
Wow.
And I think I think the pendulum has swung too far. Now, you can, like in San Francisco, you can buy something for under $200 a foot. I mean, if you would have said that 10 years ago, people would have said, I'm all over it. Now it's like, wait, the knife's still falling. What am I doing? I think if you buy, the guys that are buying buildings for $150 or $200 a square foot, if they've got staying power and they don't have debt coming due, I think they're going to be fine. If they can take a 10-year horizon, those buildings will be worth $400 or $500 a foot again. I firmly believe that. So again, if I was a young guy and can find money and wanted to work hard and had a 10-year time horizon, I'd be buying office.
In San Francisco.
In San Francisco, in the West Coast, and Seattle, San Francisco, all these towns used to be great. They used to be like, it was the best. Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, LA, Orange County. Now it's like, don't touch it with a 10-foot pole. Unless it has, and for a while it was a tech, you had to have a tech angle on it. Now San Francisco can crush because tech's leaving San Francisco. But I just think that over time, Bill Wilson always drilled into our heads, if you buy in below replacement cost, it's pretty hard to get hurt unless you're really, really not very good. So buy below replacement cost, manage the hell out of it, and remember to sell before you get back to replacement cost. So leave some meat on the bone for the next guy. But again, I think the pendulum swung too hard, and I think time will tell. But I think it's not going to come back to 1,000 a foot, but I bet you it comes back to 500 a foot, 600 a foot.
I love the way you talk. You sound a lot like Sam Zell, because Sam would talk about, hey, I always want to leave some meat on the bone because I want to do multiple deals with people. Like, he always talked about replacement costs. Before we get to your Sam Zell stories, because I'm a big fan of John Elway, obviously in Stanford, just what was it like playing with Elway? He just seemed to be so gifted athletically.
It was amazing. He was a year ahead of me, so I came out as a freshman and didn't really kind of know who he was. I'd seen kind of the SC game where he came in relief of Turk Schonert and tied up that game his freshman year. But knew he was good, but didn't really know that much about him. And when you got to campus, he was a tall, skinny kid with kind of shaggy hair and big teeth, and just fun-loving but competitive as all get out. And I think the first time I met him, we were playing ping pong in Toyon Hall, where we stayed, for summer camp, and he would not leave the table. He would win, and and if you let him beat you because you wanted to do something else, he would like make you play again. he was that kind of guy, just ultra competitive. I remember the first time I played golf with him. I mean, I think, he got all Mizuno stuff when he signed with the Yankees in his junior year, and he didn't play much golf before then. And, he'd shoot like 90 his first time out, now obviously he's like a +3 golfer, and he would come into the huddle and we'd be down and he'd go, "Hey guys, give me a little more time and we're going to score." And then you would. So he'd build this confidence in you. When he said something, it's going to happen. And, unfortunately we didn't have quite the defense when he was around. And then when he left, we had defense and no offense. So it was, just a tale of two worlds when I was at Stanford.
Was it true, last story, was it true that he was like putting crosses in people's chests and shredding people's hands because he was throwing darts?
Oh, he shredded guys' fingers. Yeah, Don Lonzinger, who's a broker, a CB broker in San Jose, has a finger that's pretty nasty to this day because John hit him so hard. The Elway cross, I think it was an exaggeration as far as the chest goes, but the guy could throw it hard, and he destroyed some fingers for sure.
Yeah, he was throwing lasers. All right, if you don't mind, because I do want to get into your asset class of today, but just please take us in the room and just talk about Sam Zell. I mean, he was just such a brilliant entrepreneur and real estate and an analyst.
I met him twice with Bill Wilson when we were doing the deal. Bill obviously became very good friends with him. Bill received his annual clocks that he used to send out, which were amazing. But he was just a very free-spirited guy and was doing he was kind of ahead of his curve as far as the legalization of certain substances, we should say. That's probably as far as I'll go. But he and Bill were simpatico. They thought the same ways. Bill he always said to us before we even met Sam Zell, let's leave something on the bone here. So we do multiple deals with these people, because people have choices on who they want to do business with. Let's make sure they want to pick us. And Sam was that way. And he, everyone loved him. I mean, he just loved him. He didn't, he was a little bit brash. He rode the motorcycles around the country and, stuff you wouldn't expect a real estate mogul to do. But he was a special man. I mean, our business was really fortunate to have him a part of it, and to be able to meet him was just a thrill of mine. The grave dancer. I read his prospectuses that he, before I ever met Bill and did what we did in our Office Opportunity Fund. So to end up selling to him was just kind of it seemed like it had come full circle.
That must have been one of those days you're like, somebody pinch me, right? That you're sitting there selling your assets or your company to him. What do you think it was about him that he just seemed to be a gifted entrepreneur and a real estate, investor? So what was it about him that made him so good, do you think?
I just think he had an uncanny sense of value. People talk about price is what you pay and value is what you get. I think he just had an uncanny sense of market timing and value and being able to find undervalued assets. Now, remember, when we sold, we thought we were selling at the top of the market. I remember going through, property by property and going, they're really going to pay us this much for that? And they're going to pay us this much for that? Wow. But he had a sense for the markets, and he goes, the market's going to let me put an X multiple on this, and I'm buying it at X less multiple, and it's going to, they're going to do great, and we're going to do even better. And that's kind of how it happened. He added Speaker properties after he added us, and Speaker kind of pinned him to the wall a little bit. I mean, they really got a good deal. And that's kind of their way. They always seem to win. But Sam wanted to build the biggest, and he wanted to build the best back then, and he did. I mean, Equity Office Properties was one of the best companies around. Richard Kincaid ran it when we turned it over, and he did a great job.
And speaking of timing, I'm sure you know his story when he sold, for $35 billion to Blackstone. I mean, it was like the peak of the market where he timed it perfectly, right?
He timed it perfectly. And then at Hudson Properties, I was on the board when Victor bought a lot of those assets back, and a lot of the buildings that we sold, Hudson Properties bought back. So it was kind of again, another circle.
So let's talk about FJM and what you're doing today. You're in industrial, pretty much along the West Coast, if you will. I know you're in Canada, but then also Minnesota, if you want to dive into that as well. But take us through your journey of FJM and why you chose industrial as your asset class.
Well, when I left, when we merged with Equity Office Properties, I wasn't going to Chicago, so I took the severance package and stayed in the Bay Area. And I coached high school football for a year. I always wanted to do that. And then I met up with my partners, and we just looked at it. We kind of moved into industrial up by default because we said, let's just look for deals where the institutional investors aren't there, and maybe we can get 50 or 100 or 200 basis points better return. And we bought an office building or two, and we ended up selling them. And we bought a ground lease under a hotel in Fisherman's Wharf and did really well on that. We were looking at land deals with income, and that kind of led us to industrial and specifically service industrial. So not high bay distribution, more the spaces that your dog groomer's in, your electrician, your plumber, small businesses, 2,500 square feet to 50,000 square feet, office in the front, a couple roll doors in the back. Real simple. We call them industrial apartments. So, when you're in the office building business for a long time, tenant improvements are just anathema. I mean, you're making all this money and all of a sudden it just goes right out the door because you got to, spend $100 a foot when a tenant moves out. In industrial, they don't do that. I mean, they don't like, we'll put paint and carpet in the little office space. If you don't like it, we're going to take you to this spot next door. But it just is a much safer, it was multi-tenant, very safe space. And the institutions really weren't buying it because it was pretty management intensive. Your properties are going to have 10 to 40 tenants in them. The institution guys didn't want to deal with that. So we were getting better returns. Well, the institutions are in them now. And so it's tightened up, and which has been great for what we own. It's just harder to buy stuff now. But yeah, we own service industrial buildings, in the Northern California market. Our first portfolio was 1 million square feet of industrial in Sacramento. And our last kind of big push was we bought 500,000 or 600,000 square feet in Las Vegas over the last 6 or 7 years. And we traded out of an apartment project in San Antonio, of all places, into the properties we bought in Minneapolis, St. Paul, kind of infill service industrial buildings. But yeah, we like that space. We think it's safe. We think we know it.
Oh, good. We got it back.
We're typically buying from families, it seems like, for the most part. And the more run down, the more we like it. And that's kind of our business. We also own 19 Planet Fitness gyms as a franchisee, and we have a $350 million book of hard money bridge loans business that we have. So kind of 3 businesses.
Wow. And where are you deploying the bridge loans at? All different asset classes?
Primarily Northern and Southern California, but I would say primarily Northern California. And it's 90%, fix and flip guys fixing up houses. We do have some traditional bridge lending business where a guy has a right to buy his building in his lease, and he's got to move quickly. And, banks can move in 6 months, and he needs to move in 30 days, So it's all timing related loans, but primarily it's single family homes. We have 140 loans in our $350 million, book of business. So, yeah, so it's a great business. I sleep the best of all our businesses with that one because we're very low loan to value, probably 55% loan to value, and they're 1-year loans, so we get to reprice them, every year. So
that is fantastic.
Yeah.
I'd love to get your take because of your experience and being in the finance realm, where you see things going. There's all this conversation about, I think it's by 2028, $2.2 trillion of CRE loans coming due. Obviously, we've seen what interest rates have done to valuations. Just everyone kind of says, oh my gosh, as you talked about, the knives are falling and CRE is going to just fall off a cliff. Do you have the same assessment, or where do you see this thing going over the next 24 to 36 months?
Well, I definitely think there's going to be some pain out there. There's no getting around it. I've got a bunch of friends, even in the Bay Area, who are, very conservative people and thought they did it right. But, when rates move like they've moved, from 3.5% to 7%, no one's escaping unless you had 50% loan to value, and then you're going to escape by the skin of your teeth. So I think rates are going to continue to pull back in 2024. I think we'll see 100 basis point pullback or so, would be my guess. So I think that'll help alleviate some of the problems, but there's problems happening now. And I think lenders are smart enough now to know that if you've got a good borrower and someone who's taking care of the property, leave them in place and just work out a friendly deal to give the equity back. But there's going to be pain for a lot of people. And I don't think anyone saw rates going from 3.5 to 7. I mean, I could say we're in that boat as well. We've got some things that I wish I would have put some collars and stuff, caps on some things, and then we didn't do it because we didn't think they would go that high. But I think they're going to pull back, and I think if if we were always very conservative with our leverage, 50, 60%. If you were a 75, 80% guy, you're going to have some pain. But I think long term, I think the commercial real estate business is a great business, and if you got to match your liabilities with your cash flow, and if you don't, which a lot of people didn't, you're going to have this pain, and it's just kind of a weeding out.
Let's say you were going to go out and raise a distressed asset fund in the next 12 months, knowing there's going to be some pain coming in the next 18 to 36. Where would you be looking to deploy that capital?
Well, first of all, I probably wouldn't, because that capital is already out there, ready to go, waiting to go. And so I don't think that the dips are going to be as great as they were, say, in the early 90s or even the 2000 kind of dip. There's just too much capital out there, and it's going to step in sooner. So again, if I was young, if I was 25 years old, I'd be all over the office space. I think that's a good place. I think there's going to be some great buys in apartments, multifamily, specifically even in the Southwest, in some really dynamic markets, Phoenix, Dallas, some other places, Las Vegas, because people they didn't capitalize it correctly, right? They put too much debt on. So there's going to be some pain there, and there's going to be some opportunities. I don't think there's going to be a lot of opportunities in the industrial space, because most of it's institutionally owned anyway. But I think there's going to be some select retail opportunities if you're comfortable with that space. I think neighborhood retail is always going to be in demand. I think that the malls are ultimately going to evolve into something completely different. I think they'll all be kind of lifestyle centers, or they'll be scraped and apartments and office put up. But we've seen a little of that already in the Bay Area. But so that's where I see. I mean, we're going to stick to our knitting and just do our little, small, 50 to 200,000 square foot service industrial property. That's our bread and butter. And again, still try to stay away from the big institutional capital if we can.
Couple more items, because I just am so grateful for your time, and I know that you're swinging the sticks today. But want to get your take on the idea. A lot of people talking about office conversion into multifamily. What's your assessment of that?
I've read a lot on it, and the floor plates just usually don't work. I mean, rarely do they work, and the ones I've seen seem still kind of funky. They're dropping light wells down the middle of buildings, and that's kind of some of the light you're getting, and it just doesn't seem to work. I do think that the cities, the municipalities, San Francisco and some other places, LA, downtown LA, are going to have to get more creative in the zoning to allow people to do that more. But I don't think the prices are going to fall enough to make it make sense. We'll see. Time will tell. I mean, people are trying to do it, obviously, and they're having some success in New York and some other places, but I find it very difficult. I think you might be almost better off buying it cheaper and tearing it down and getting, the city to allow you to just build it new. Because I've found when you try to make big renovations, every peel back of the onion, you find another problem, and then all of a sudden you say, "Gosh, you just should have torn it down."
It's really interesting you say that. I don't know if you remember Jair Lynch, but he was a big gymnast at Stanford. He's out in DC now doing development. He said the same thing as Chris. We're just tearing stuff down and just rebuilding it because you can't do the replacement or the conversion. So with AI and everything going on there, I don't know if you saw Microsoft did really well because of their Azure and all the servers. And one of the things we haven't talked about, but you hear Steven Schwartzman from Blackstone talk about a lot, is data centers. Your thoughts on that space?
Well, again, I wish I would have bought EMC a long time ago, because I started noticing all the, what are people doing with all these pictures they're taking? You see people taking pictures on their phone. That's got to be stored somewhere. That data's got to be stored somewhere. So I think data centers, I think we're going to need a lot of those. I think it's especially, I don't understand it. I know you need huge power. You got to be in certain locations. And I've had some friends that have made fortunes, like they do one deal and they're living off one deal. So I think that's going to continue to explode, because people aren't taking less pictures and people aren't looking at less TikTok or making less videos. So I think that the data storage would be a great business. It's gotten kind of institutionalized. Rick Magnuson did a great job with his data storage business, and I just think it's going to continue to expand. But I think it's gotten so institutional, it's going to be tough to do an individual deal like Chris and Matt get together and build a data storage facility that's going to surprise somebody. I think that cat's out of the bag.
with the capital on the sidelines, it's really amazing to see where this thing's going to go. So you talked about you coaching high school football. Last question for you. You get a chance to sit down with some guys that are playing Stanford football now, and they ask you to coach and mentor them in regards to getting involved in commercial real estate. What's the top 1, 2, 3 things you tell them? Hey, these are the must things you must do.
Well, again, I think understand how deals are put together, understand the capital stack. I think our business is very people driven still. That really matters. Other businesses it doesn't. I think relationships in our business are very important. It used to be for information. Information is kind of ubiquitous now. You can get it anywhere, but it's still a relationship driven business where you want someone to pick you over someone else whose money is just as good as yours. That's important. So I would say your reputation, you only get it once, and once you lose it, you're not getting it back. So learn the fundamentals on how deals are put together, and then protect your reputation. It's sacrosanct. So don't screw it up, and do well by people, and they'll do well by you.
Keep some meat on the bone. So Matt, we really appreciate the time. Again, I know you're out golfing, so thank you very much, and look forward to doing this again, hopefully in the future. Okay.
Well, Chris, fun to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.